The filing deadline for next year's midterms is tonight at 6, and we are seeing some last-minute changes in who's running for what. Even this morning, as we just heard, Colin Allred has decided to drop out of the Democratic primary for U.S. Senate. He will instead run for his old seat, the 33rd Congressional District. Meantime, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett's expected to announce her Senate bid later today. Some of the last-minute scrambling may have been influenced by the U.S. Supreme Court's decision late last week to uphold the Texas legislature's redrawn congressional maps through at least next year's elections. The new boundaries, drawn at President Trump's urging, are designed to favor Republicans, overturn several seats, and in particular, as we're seeing play out here in Houston, force some longtime incumbents into difficult choices: run against one another in primaries, retire from Congress, or seek another office. Texas Tribune reporter Gabby Birenbaum joins us now with more. Gabby, good morning.
Thanks for having me. Good morning.
The case brought to court has been that lawmakers redrew the maps along racial lines to reduce representation for non-white voters. You can't do that. The state has argued it redrew purely along political lines. Here in the Houston area, is there clear evidence that these new barriers, new borders rather, will in fact reduce representation for Black and Latino voters?
So that was certainly what, the plaintiffs in the case alleged, and that was what the three-panel federal court, found in El Paso. So, they found that in the Houston area, yes, there were 4 Democratic seats. Now there's going to be 3, and they felt that the districts were drawn. For example, the new 9th seat, which is going to favor Republicans, is almost exactly about 51% Hispanic citizen voter age population. They, the initial court found that that was sort of intentional, and that there was discrimination there, against voters of color. The Supreme Court said, no, this was done on a partisan basis, and while this case makes its way through the courts and gets adjudicated, we will allow the new map to proceed for this cycle. So I think we're not done, ruling on the merits of the case, but at least for this cycle, we're moving forward with the 2025 map that was drawn this summer.
What do these new maps mean in particular for the 18th Congressional District, which is at the moment still without a representative until a late January runoff to replace the late Sylvester Turner, and even then only for the remainder of his term? What happens after all that?
Yeah, so for a situation in the 18th, that's already been enormously confusing, I think for voters, it's only going to get more confusing, unfortunately. So, we had an election in early November to replace or to finish out Sylvester Turner's seat, and that was done under the old map. We had 2 candidates emerge from that for a runoff, Christian Menefee and Amanda Edwards. Those 2, the runoff will be on January 30th, and that's still under the old map because, again, that's to fill out the remainder of a seat that was elected under the old map. However, the winner of that seat will then have to turn around and face a primary under the new map, in which the district is changing a lot, About 75% of the voters in that district are coming in from different districts now. And they're going to have to face off against Congressman Al Green, who's been in Congress since 2005, has represented Houston for decades. He represented the 9th district. That was redrawn. The vast majority of voters in the 9th district are going to be in the new 18th. And so the voters that elected either Edwards or Menefee, is going to be a different coalition of people for the new 18th. And this could then turn into a sort of primary about age, because Congressman Green in his 70s, both Edwards and Menefee are younger, under 45.
Aside from redrawn Houston area districts, how do the new map, the new lines favor Republicans statewide?
Yeah, so 5 seats in particular were targeted to be redrawn so that, some of them had already been won by Trump, but also by a House Democrat. Some favored both Kamala Harris and a Democrat. They've all been redrawn so that Trump won each of those 5 seats by at least 10 points, and in some cases more, So in South Texas, there are 2 seats that Democrats represent that Trump won. They increased the number of Trump voters in those districts. And then in Dallas, Houston, and Austin, they combined Democratic seats so that in each of those metro areas, there's 1 fewer Democrat-leaning seats. And so the goal is to flip 5 seats for Republicans. Depending on the cycle, it could end up being 3 seats or 4 seats, but most people agree Republicans are going to gain seats from this maneuver.
You noted the 18th district, the new 18th district in next year's elections. Once we're past the runoff, that they could create an environment where it becomes a primary campaign among the Democrats, built in large measure around age because of the likely significant age distinction here between Congressman Green and whichever, of Edwards or Menefee ends up winning the runoff. Is that the only district in Texas where we're seeing that phenomenon play out?
So we could have seen it right in Austin, and that sort of played out over the summer, where Congressman Doggett, who is also, in his 70s, could have been in a primary right against Congressman Cuellar, who's in his 30s. Their districts were combined. They sort of played it out over the summer in a shadow primary, and ultimately Congressman Doggett decided to retire at the end of this term and sort of leave that seat to Congressman Cuellar. So that sort of played out in Austin, and ultimately Congressman Doggett made his decision. We've seen Congressman Green make a different decision, right? Part of that is that there is no existing incumbent like a Congressman Cuellar in Houston because that seat has been held empty for so long. And so, that's one area where age has played out. Um, but yeah, I think the 18th district is going to be the main district where you see that dynamic that has affected Democrats, I think, really since the summer of 2024, and President Biden ended up dropping out of the presidential race over age-related concerns. I think that dynamic is really going to come to play in the 18th more than anywhere else.
You mentioned South Texas. There are a couple of districts that, well, they're going to be intriguing races, to say the least. Just pardoned former Congressman Henry Cuellar is running again. Vicente Gonzalez will run in a district that President Trump won handily last year. What do their respective prospects look like?
Yeah, so those are both seats that are going to be difficult to hold for Democrats, but I think also more difficult to flip for Republicans than the notion of just, well, they're just going to pick up 5 seats, right? Would have you believe. Congressman Cuellar in particular, he has held on to his Laredo-based seat through cycles that, were bluer, through cycles that were redder. He's warded off primary challengers. He's warded off general election challengers. The district was redrawn. It had been about Trump +7. Now it's going to be Trump +10, so not super different. And what really made matters easier for Congressman Cuellar, right, is President Trump pardoned him. He was facing a federal indictment over bribery accusations. That's now gone, right? Trump pardoned him. And on the same day that that happened, Cuellar did file as a Democrat, ending any speculation, right, that there might have been some sort of deal or he was going to change parties. Um, so for Congressman Cuellar, right, I think that sort of argument just got a lot easier. On the other hand, Congressman Gonzalez, that's a district that runs from Cameron County up to about Corpus Christi. That had been Trump +4, and he held on last cycle. Now it's going to be Trump +10. Most analysts, right, think that that's going to be more difficult to hang on to for Congressman Gonzalez than Cuellar. However, both of these are districts that are heavily Hispanic. And so a lot of this is going to depend on how Hispanic voters sort of shift in the 2026 midterm. We saw a big shift right towards President Trump in 2024 in that community. And I think a lot of people are expecting that they might shift back towards Democrats. It just depends sort of how large that shift is. But that's going to be an uphill battle for Congressman Gonzalez, but certainly winnable.
We have a listener question, wants to know about the calendar and why things are playing out the way they are. Why is there a filing deadline today for the midterm elections well before, in the case of a special runoff election, that even takes place? Why is the calendar playing out the way it is?
Yeah, so Texas has a much earlier sort of election procedural cycle than most states because its primary is so early. So the primary is on March 3rd, right? That's one of the earliest ones in the nation. I think it is the earliest. So that means that candidates sort of have to be in place by today, December 8th, so that all the county clerks and election officials can make sure, right, all the ballot materials, early voting, everything, that all the names are there and do their due diligence there. So that's why this is so much earlier. Obviously, in Houston with the special election, it's getting really complicated because you have that runoff right in the middle between filing deadline and the primary. And that's why, both Christian Menefee and Amanda Edwards have had to file for the primary, even though they don't know which one of them will end up being the representative, because they don't have the luxury, right, of waiting to find out because the deadline was today.
I mentioned Colin Allred's decision this morning to drop out of the U.S. Senate race and run instead for his old seat in the 33rd District. And Jasmine Crockett is expected to make her Senate announcement later today. Could we see any other last-minute decisions before 6 o'clock?
Yeah, I think the biggest domino, right, is what Congresswoman Crockett's going to do. I think we all expect that she's going to announce a bid for Senate. Um, you mentioned, right, Colin Allred, also in the 33rd, Congresswoman Julie Johnson is running there. So that's going to sort of pit an incumbent against her predecessor, and that'll be an interesting Democratic primary. But I think, yeah, of course, we're always waiting to see, does anybody file at the last minute, unexpected? Does anybody, move districts unexpectedly, any last minute retirements? So I think I would be surprised if there was, zero drama left today.
In redrawing its congressional map, Texas started a sort of redistricting arms race this year. Which other states are still pursuing redistricting now?
Yeah, so the biggest sort of counterbalance to Texas was that California came in, had a ballot measure to see if they could change their map to try to add 5 seats for Democrats, and that was successful. So that might have, neutralized the impact of Texas. We've already seen Missouri and North Carolina each redraw their maps to add 1 seat. Ohio had a court order to redraw maps, and that could add 1 to 2 seats for Republicans. Virginia, which just a Democratic trifecta just came in their election in 2025. They have a 6-5 map to favor Democrats. They're talking about redrawing it to be 9-2 or even 10-1. So that could add, right, 3 to 4 Democratic seats. Indiana, state legislature, the state house passed a map to eliminate all the Democratic seats and go to 9-0. Now that's lingering in the state Senate where nobody knows, right, exactly how they're going to vote on it. There's been a lot of pushback among Republicans in Indiana. Florida, Republican state, is considering redistricting, and they're going to start talking about that in the new year. And then some other states, right, had stayed out of it, like Illinois, but you could see Democratic state, you could see if Indiana moves on it, does Illinois try to balance that out? And I think, every action sort of seems to have an equal and opposite reaction here in redistricting. And so there's still a long time between now and other states' filing deadlines. And we could see more action in other states.
Is it clear which party will ultimately benefit from all of this?
I think what's clear is that when President Trump first pushed Texas to do this, right, the implication was that there was more meat on the bone for Republicans in red-leaning states. And I think because California took on this maneuver to sort of get around their commission, I think we're seeing that that's no sure thing.
Is it possible that even if the demographics suggest the GOP might benefit in the aggregate of all these redrawn maps, that the effort could ultimately backfire against Republicans and the House flip to Democrats anyway?
I think it absolutely could, right? And apologies for my voice. Had a cold over the weekend, but yeah, I think it absolutely could. The president's party almost always loses seats, right, in the cycle. After winning, we would expect Democrats to do better anyway. And with redistricting canceling out in some of these states, I do think that this move could backfire. And I think Republicans are sort of reckoning with that right now.
Hope you feel better, Gabby. Thank you very much for the time. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.